The rise and fall of Nokia, a $300 billion mistake. In 2007, Nokia controlled 50% of the entire global smartphone market. They had 120,000 employees, revenues of over 50 billion euros, a market value approaching $300 billion. They were untouchable. 6 years later, they sold their entire phone division to Microsoft for $7.2 billion, a 90% drop in value. And the CEO at the time said something that still haunts the tech world. We did not do anything wrong, but somehow we lost. This is the story of how the most dominant phone company in history destroyed itself. Nokia's story begins in 1865 in a small town in southern Finland, but they were not making phones. They were making paper. A mining engineer named Frederick Idestam founded a wood pulp mill, and for the next century, Nokia was a conglomerate making everything from rubber boots to television sets. In 1982, Nokia made their first car phone. It was massive, expensive, and required its own suitcase, but it was a start. By 1992, the company made a fateful decision to abandon all their other businesses and bet everything on mobile phones. That bet paid off spectacularly. By 1998, Nokia had overtaken Motorola to become the #1 mobile phone manufacturer in the world. Their phones were everywhere. The Nokia 3310, launched in 2000, became legendary for its near-indestructible design and the addictive game Snake. If you were born in the 80s or 90s, there is a very high chance that the first phone you ever owned was a Nokia. They were not just a phone company, they were the phone company. And by 1999, their operating profit had reached $4 billion. In the early 2000s, Nokia was doing everything right, or so it seemed. In 2003, they launched the Nokia 1100, which became the single best-selling mobile phone of all time with over 250 million units sold. Let that sink in. 250 million phones. No iPhone model has ever come close to that number. Nokia also dominated smartphones with their Symbian operating system. The Nokia N95, launched in 2007, was considered the most advanced smartphone in the world. It had GPS, a 5-megapixel camera, Wi-Fi, and video calling. Technically, Nokia was years ahead of everyone. At their absolute peak, Nokia had a 40% global market share in mobile phones and 50% of all smartphones sold worldwide. They were the undisputed king. And in June 2007, even after Apple released the first iPhone, Nokia still held 50% of the smartphone market, while Apple had just 5%. Nobody, absolutely nobody, thought Nokia was in danger. On June 29, 2007, Steve Jobs walked onto a stage and changed the world forever. He introduced the iPhone, a device with no physical keyboard, a full touch screen, and an operating system that was designed for finger-based interaction from the ground up. Nokia engineers reportedly watched the announcement and shrugged. The first iPhone did not even have 3G. It could not send picture messages. The camera was only 2 megapixels. Compared to the Nokia N95, the iPhone was technically inferior in almost every way, but Apple understood something Nokia did not. The future of phones was not about hardware specifications. It was about software, user experience, and ecosystems. Apple was not building a phone. They were building a platform where third-party developers could create apps, where media companies could sell content, and where the user experience was fluid and intuitive. Nokia was still thinking about phones as devices you use to make calls and send texts. Apple was thinking about phones as pocket computers that could do literally anything, and that difference in vision would cost Nokia everything. What makes Nokia's story truly tragic is how slowly the collapse happened. After 2008, Nokia's market share started to erode gradually, but instead of a dramatic overnight failure, it was like watching a glacier melt. slow, steady, and absolutely unstoppable. The core problem was Symbian. Nokia's operating system had been built for phones with physical keyboards and tiny screens. Trying to adapt it for touch screens was like putting a jet engine on a bicycle. It technically worked, but the experience was terrible. Meanwhile, Google launched Android in 2008, giving every phone manufacturer in the world a free, modern, touchscreen optimized operating system. Samsung, HTC, and LG all jumped on Android immediately. Nokia refused. They believed they could fix Symbian. They believed their brand loyalty was strong enough to overcome a bad user experience. They were catastrophically wrong. Internal dysfunction made everything worse. Nokia had implemented a matrix, organizational structure that created layers of bureaucracy. Key staff members who had built Nokia's success started leaving. Infighting between executives paralyzed decision-making. While Apple and Google were moving at lightning speed, Nokia was stuck in meetings arguing about strategy. By 2012, Nokia had dropped from first to second place in market share. In just 5 years, their annual profit went from 8 billion euros to a loss of 1 billion. The Microsoft gamble. In February 2011, Nokia made their last desperate gamble. New CEO Stephen Elop announced that Nokia was abandoning Symbian and switching to Windows Phone as their main operating system. Not Android, Windows Phone. This decision baffled the industry. Android was free, had massive market share, and a growing app ecosystem. Windows Phone had almost nothing. Critics called it tying yourself to a sinking ship. But Nokia had its reasons. A partnership with Microsoft came with financial incentives and the promise of differentiation from the sea of Android phones. Nokia launched the Lumia series with Windows Phone. The hardware was beautiful, the cameras were industry-leading, but the app ecosystem was barren. No Instagram, no Snapchat, barely any of the apps that consumers demanded. You could have the best phone in the world, but if it could not run the apps people wanted, it was useless. In September 2013, Nokia sold its entire phone division to Microsoft for $7.2 billion. It was over. And what makes this even more painful, just 2 years later, Microsoft wrote off $7.6 billion on the acquisition, essentially admitting the entire deal was a failure. They then sold what remained to HMD Global for $350 million, a 95% loss. Nokia's collapse holds some of the most important business lessons of the 21st century. Lesson 1. Market leadership is temporary. Nokia had 50% market share and lost nearly everything in 6 years. No matter how dominant you are, the market owes you nothing. Complacency is the beginning of the end. Lesson 2. Software eats hardware. Nokia made the best phone hardware in the world. But Apple and Google understood that in the modern era, software and ecosystems matter more than physical specifications. The best hardware with bad software will always lose to good hardware with great software. Lesson 3. Adapt or die. Nokia had multiple chances to adopt Android. They refused every time. Samsung, who was barely a player in smartphones before 2010, adopted Android and became the #1 phone manufacturer in the world. The same opportunity was available to Nokia. They chose pride over survival. Lesson 4. Internal culture can kill you faster than external competition. Nokia's bureaucracy, executive infighting, and resistance to change destroyed the company from the inside. The iPhone did not kill Nokia. Nokia's inability to respond to the iPhone killed Nokia. Today, Nokia still exists, but they no longer make phones. They focus on telecom infrastructure, the networks that phones run on, the things the public never sees. Nokia phones still exist under the HMD Global brand, run by former Nokia executives, but they are a shadow of what Nokia once was. And the CEO's quote still echoes, We did not do anything wrong, but somehow we lost. But that is not really true, is it? They did do something wrong. They stopped adapting. They stopped listening. And they believed that being the biggest meant they could not fail. In business and in personal finance, the moment you stop evolving is the moment you start dying. Nokia had 300 billion reasons to change. They chose not to. And that is perhaps the most expensive lesson in the history of technology. If this story made you think differently about adapting and evolving, hit subscribe, because the next video will show you the simple budget rule that has transformed millions of people's finances.